Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you a truth. Most people never realize avoidant people do not disappear because they are stronger than you. They disappear because you give them permission to leave. Not consciously, not intentionally, but through the patterns you unknowingly reinforce. Every avoidant partner has a habit. The moment emotional closeness appears, they step back. And you, wanting to save the connection, take a step forward. You soften your tone, you reassure them, you chase their affection, you excuse their distance, you shrink your needs, and suddenly the relationship is no longer two equals. It becomes one person doing the emotional work and another controlling the pace without ever saying a word. But here's what no one tells you. Avoidants don't actually fear closeness as much as they fear losing control. When you chase, you hand them that control. When you over-explain, over-justify, and over-give, you send a message that says, you get to decide if we stay connected. And that message is the fuel that keeps the avoidant cycle alive. So how do you shift this dynamic? How do you regain your power in a relationship where someone pulls away? You start by recognizing that you are not powerless, you are not waiting to be chosen, you are not hoping to be valued. You are the one who chooses how someone gets access to you. You decide the rules for emotional connection. You decide the pace of the relationship. You decide what your heart allows and what it refuses to tolerate. Avoidants don't leave out of strength. They leave because they never encounter consequences. They leave because you don't challenge the pattern. They leave because you unknowingly teach them that you will always be there, no matter how inconsistent they are. But when you stop offering unconditional access, everything changes. When you stop rewarding emotional distance with loyalty, the dynamic flips. Suddenly, the avoidant begins to feel the space, not as freedom, but as loss. Suddenly, they realize that silence doesn't bring them peace. It costs them connection. Suddenly, they no longer retreat into avoidance because retreating now means risking you. And unlike before, losing you is no longer a safe option. You shift the relationship not by demanding closeness, but by matching energy with energy. When they pull away, you don't chase. When they get quiet, you become calm. When they need space, you give it without offering your emotional labor on a silver tray. You show that you are steady, but you are not static, present, but not predictable, loving, but not limitless. And here is the most important part. When you honor your boundaries, you activate theirs. When you value your worth, you awaken their fear of losing something valuable. Avoidants don't change when you explain your needs. They change when they feel your standards. Because the moment you stop accepting crumbs, they must decide whether to show up or to give up. And that decision reveals everything. You are not here to bend for someone who only leans in when it is convenient. You are not here to prove you are lovable. You are here to recognize that your vulnerability is a privilege, not a bargaining chip. An avoidant cannot leave you unless you keep the door open. Close the door, not out of anger, but out of self-respect, and watch how quickly the dynamic transforms. Because at the end of the day, the greatest power you have is not forcing someone to stay. It is commanding such value in yourself that leaving you becomes the last thing they want to dow in. You interact with an avoidant person, whether in dating, relationships, or even friendships. The dynamic you experience is largely shaped by what you allow, what you reward, and what you tolerate. People often think avoidants behave the way they do because they are emotionally stronger or because they simply don't need connection the way others do. But the truth is far simpler and far more empowering. Avoidants learn how to treat you based on the patterns you reinforce. Every time you respond to their distance with more closeness, every time you compensate for their lack of effort with extra effort of your own, and every time you soften your standards to maintain the connection, you send a message, one they internalize immediately, that you're willing to carry the relationship even when they step back from it. Avoidant individuals subconsciously rely on a partner who adapts to their inconsistencies. They expect that if they pull away, you will move closer. They expect that if they minimize emotional conversations, you will avoid them too. And they expect that if they reduce effort, you will increase yours in fear of losing them. You become the stabilizer of the relationship, the one who holds everything together while they take the emotional shortcuts. Even if you think you're simply being understanding, patient, or loving, what the avoidant learns is very different. They learn that they can withdraw without consequence. They learn that you will stay available regardless of how much they disconnect. They learn that intimacy will always be there for them to step into whenever they feel ready, because you'll keep that space open. The problem is not that you are too giving. The problem is that you are giving in the wrong moments. You give your reassurance when you should be holding a boundary. You give your presence when you should be matching their distance. You give explanations, justifications, and emotional labor that they haven't earned. And once the avoidant sees that you will take responsibility for the bond, they naturally take less of it. This dynamic becomes a silent contract, one where they lead with avoidance and you respond with overfunctioning. The more they lean out, the more you lean in. The more they disconnect, the more you hold on. You might think you are helping the relationship survive, but in reality, you are enabling the very behavior that hurts you. Teaching someone how to treat you is not about lectures, discussions, or emotional speeches. It is about the actions you tolerate and the patterns you reinforce. If you reward their withdrawal with more affection, they'll keep withdrawing. If you tolerate their inconsistency while offering consistency of your own, they'll see no need to grow. And if you accept their minimum while offering your maximum, they will never rise to meet you at your level. Human behavior adapts to the easiest path available, and the avoidant attachment style thrives when the other person assumes all the emotional responsibility. You teach an avoidant to treat you well only when you stop rewarding the behaviors that make you feel undervalued. When you stop chasing, stop overexplaining, stop proving your worth, and stop filling the emotional gaps they create, they're forced to confront their own patterns. They must either step up or step aside. Either way, you regain control of the connection because you finally recognize your role in shaping how someone responds to you. You are not powerless in the dynamic. You are, in fact, the one who determines the rules they learn to follow. Avoidant individuals are often misunderstood as people who simply dislike closeness or lack emotional depth. But the core of their behavior is not a rejection of intimacy. It is a need to control how intimacy happens. Their distancing patterns, slow emotional responses, and sudden withdrawals are not random. They are strategies designed to manage the pace of connection in a way that feels safe to them. What truly threatens them is not love or affection, but the feeling of losing control within a relationship dynamic. And the moment you start chasing, overexpressing, or overfunctioning, you unintentionally hand them that control on a silver platter. When someone with an avoidant attachment style senses that you want closeness more than they do, they immediately gain a psychological advantage. They get to regulate when the relationship moves forward, when it pauses, when it becomes warm, and when it turns cold. Every time you react to their distance by stepping closer, you confirm their belief that they can dictate the emotional rhythm simply by withdrawing. In their internal world, closeness equals vulnerability, and vulnerability equals danger. So when you rush in to reassure, when you take on the responsibility of keeping things stable, or when you try to fix what they are breaking, you inadvertently allow them to feel safe by staying detached. They feel protected because the power of connection lies entirely in their hands. Avoidants are not trying to be manipulative. Their behavior is born from old emotional wounds. Their coping mechanism is to create space whenever emotions intensify. But they only stay comfortable in this mechanism when the other person fills the emotional space for them. When you chase, they feel justified in pulling away. When you ask for clarity during their silence, they feel validated in being silent. When you compensate for their lack of effort with your extra effort, they gain a sense of emotional dominance without ever consciously seeking it. They feel in control not because they are leading the relationship, but because you are allowing them to control how much connection they must participate in. This imbalance can leave you feeling anxious, powerless, and emotionally starved, while the avoidant remains oddly calm. This calmness doesn't come from their inner peace. It comes from the comfort of knowing they are emotionally protected while you take on the vulnerability of pursuit. They get to stay in their safe zone while you do the emotional heavy lifting. And the more you try to pull them closer, the more they retreat, not out of disinterest, but out of the fear that they are losing the ability to regulate the connection on their own terms. The surprising truth is that avoidants often crave closeness deeply, but only when they feel they are choosing it, not being pressured into it. They want intimacy, but they want to approach it when they feel prepared and when they feel safe enough to step forward. When they sense that you desire closeness too intensely, they feel as though they are being emotionally outpaced, and their instinct is to protect themselves by withdrawing. In their mind, distance restores balance. It gives them room to breathe, space to reset, and reassurance that they are still in control of their emotional experience. Your job is not to fix them or convince them of your value. Your real power lies in not allowing their discomfort to dictate the entire relationship. When you stop chasing and allow the emotional space to exist without filling it, the avoidant no longer feels like they hold all the control. Without your pursuit, their usual strategy becomes ineffective. Their distance no longer stabilizes the dynamic, it destabilizes it, and for the first time they must confront the fact that they cannot maintain connection simply by retreating. Control begins to shift, not because you force it, but because you remove the behaviors that handed them that control in the first place. Avoidant individuals rarely change because someone asks them to. They don't respond to long conversations, emotional explanations, or repeated requests for closeness. In fact, those things often make them retreat even further because they feel pressured, overwhelmed, or trapped. What truly shifts the dynamic with an avoidant is not your words, it's your boundaries. Boundaries create a new emotional environment that forces them to adapt. They signal that you are not chasing, not begging, not negotiating, and not willing to play the role that keeps them comfortable in their avoidance. When your actions, not your speeches, show that you value yourself, the entire relationship moves into a different framework. Avoidants are used to partners who try to bridge the emotional gap for them. They rely on others to handle the discomfort of uncertainty. When they withdraw, they expect you to move closer. When they get inconsistent, they expect you to compensate. When they avoid vulnerability, they expect you to double your emotional efforts. This pattern allows them to maintain emotional safety without ever confronting their fears. But boundaries interrupt that comfort. When you respond to their distance with calmness instead of pursuit, they experience something unfamiliar, accountability. When you match their energy rather than smoothing over the disconnection, they suddenly recognize that emotional access to you is not automatic. When you stop overgiving, they are forced to confront the reality that if they want connection, they must contribute to it. Boundaries are not about punishment, they are about clarity. You are not withdrawing to hurt the avoidant, you are simply refusing to abandon yourself. Instead of pleading for their presence, you keep living your life. Instead of over-explaining your feelings, you express them once and let your actions reinforce your worth. Instead of offering endless reassurance, you allow the silence to exist without sacrificing your self-respect. The avoidant begins to feel the shift instantly. They no longer experience you as someone who fills all the emotional gaps they create. They start to feel that their choices have weight. Their distance now has consequences, not dramatic ones, but natural ones. If they take space, you take space. If they slow down, the relationship slows down. The emotional burden no longer falls entirely on you. What's fascinating is how quickly avoidants feel the difference. When they no longer control the rhythm of connection through withdrawal, they become aware of their own desire for closeness. With your boundaries in place, their old strategy stops yielding the safety it used to. Instead of feeling powerful when they pull away, they start feeling uncertain. Instead of feeling calm in their distance, they begin to feel the risk of losing something meaningful. Instead of expecting you to chase, they start wondering if they should move closer. Your boundaries don't push them away, they pull them forward if they genuinely care. This shift doesn't just change the avoidant, it changes you. You stop seeing yourself as the one waiting to be chosen. You stop interpreting their distance as a reflection of your worth. You stop performing emotional labor they haven't earned. Boundaries return you to emotional center. They allow you to experience the relationship with clarity rather than anxiety. They make it possible for the avoidant to show up, not because you begged, but because the dynamic finally demands their participation. In the end, boundaries reset the entire dynamic because they remind both people of the truth. A relationship is a two-person contribution. When you stop carrying what isn't yours to carry, the avoidant must choose between stepping forward or stepping out, and that clarity is where real transformation begins. Giving an avoidant person space is often misunderstood. Many people think space automatically means disconnecting, waiting silently, or hoping the avoidant eventually returns. But space is only powerful when it is paired with emotional independence. If you give space while secretly panicking, overthinking, or waiting for them to re-engage, the avoidant can still feel your emotional pressure. You may not be texting or calling, but your energy is still tied to their actions. They remain in control because you are still emotionally reacting to them, just quietly. True space works only when it comes from a place of confidence, not fear. When you give someone distance without clinging to the outcome, you shift the dynamic completely. The avoidant no longer experiences your space as something that benefits them. They experience it as something that challenges them. Avoidants often withdraw because it restores a sense of balance for them. When they feel overwhelmed, pressured, or emotionally exposed, distance gives them a sense of safety. And that safety is only reinforced when you respond by becoming smaller, quieter, or more understanding. They get to retreat while still feeling the security of your presence waiting in the background. But when you give space from a grounded, centered place without chasing, without overthinking, and without shrinking your needs, they lose the emotional advantage. They can no longer retreat into silence with the comforting belief that you will be right there when they return. Instead, they begin to feel the reality of your absence, not as peace, but as a shift in the relationship dynamics. What makes this so effective is that avoidants are not immune to connection. They are simply overwhelmed by it. Your emotional independence allows them to breathe without losing respect for you. Many people confuse space with passivity. They think that pulling back means waiting helplessly, hoping the avoidant reappears. But emotional independence turns that time into something else entirely. It becomes a moment for you to reconnect with your own identity, your hobbies, your social life, your goals, your sense of self. You fill your time with things that energize you rather than obsessing over their next move. And when the avoidant senses that you are not anxiously waiting, the dynamic begins to shift. They no longer feel that closeness equals confinement. Instead, they see that connection with you still allows freedom, individuality, and balance. This is where attraction quietly rebuilds itself. Avoidants are drawn to partners who are emotionally steady, not partners who crumble at the slightest distance. When you show that space does not scare you, you communicate two things at once. You are capable of closeness, but you are equally capable of independence. You are available, but not dependent. You care, but you do not cling. This duality is what makes avoidants feel safe enough to move toward you. When you give confident space, they no longer perceive you as someone who will suffocate them. Instead, they see you as someone who can meet them where they are, without losing yourself in the process. And something subtle begins to happen. The avoidant starts to question their old patterns. They notice that pulling back no longer guarantees stability. Your calm distance makes them reflect instead of retreat. They feel the loss of connection instead of assuming it will always be there. They become curious, even cautious about how you're feeling. The energy shifts. Their silence no longer controls you. Your independence begins to influence them. For the first time, they must evaluate whether their avoidance is worth risking someone who doesn't chase, but also doesn't disappear. And in that moment, their desire for closeness has room to grow because your strength, not your pursuit, creates the space for intimacy to deepen. You hold far more power in a relationship with an avoidant than you realize, but that power only becomes visible when you understand that you control access to your emotional world. Avoidants are not the gatekeepers, you are. They may pull back, go silent, or give inconsistent energy, but none of that dictates the relationship unless you allow it. The dynamic only becomes unequal when you accept behavior that leaves you emotionally hungry, anxious, or undervalued. The moment you stop treating inconsistency as something you must work around, everything shifts. You begin to see that they are not the ones deciding the health of the relationship. You are the one deciding what you will and will not accept. Access to you, Your time, presence, attention, affection, and emotional intimacy is something they must earn, not something they automatically receive. Avoidants often behave as though leaving is their power. They retreat, assuming you will keep the connection alive. They distance themselves, trusting that you will patiently wait. They withhold, knowing you will fill the emotional space. But none of this works without your participation. The avoidance pattern functions only when the other person is allowing it. Their withdrawal has power only when you make excuses for it. Their inconsistency becomes normal only when you tolerate it. Their silence becomes the rhythm of the relationship only when you respond to it with loyalty instead of standards. But when you reclaim emotional control, when you stop rewarding behavior that hurts you, when you stop giving more than you receive, their entire pattern collapses. They no longer get to set the tone through distance, because distance no longer guarantees your continued availability. The power you hold is not loud, confrontational, or demanding. It is subtle, quiet, steady, and grounded. You don't have to push them away or threaten to leave. You simply live in alignment with your value. When someone steps back, you step into your own life, not toward them. When they stop showing effort, you don't increase yours. When they give the bare minimum, you do not stretch yourself thin to compensate. You demonstrate that connection with you is not automatic. It is a privilege that requires mutual presence. This is the kind of power that reshapes relationships. Not force, not manipulation, standards. Standards that say, I am willing to connect deeply, but not at the cost of my self-worth. Avoidants feel this shift instantly. When they sense that access to you is no longer guaranteed, they begin to evaluate their own actions. They start thinking about what they could lose instead of assuming they will always have you. They realize that withdrawing too far or too often may result in losing someone who genuinely mattered. This is not about triggering fear or insecurity. It's about allowing natural consequences to exist. When you stop cushioning their avoidance, they finally experience the truth. Connection requires participation. They can't stay on the sidelines and expect you to hold the relationship together. And surprisingly, many avoidants step up when they realize your value is not something they can take for granted. What makes this dynamic so transformative is that it returns you to emotional center. Before, you may have felt like you were waiting on their decisions, their moods, and their fears. But once you recognize your own power, their avoidance stops feeling like a verdict on your worth. You stop internalizing their distance. You stop chasing clarity from someone who isn't offering it. You stop negotiating with behavior that doesn't meet your needs. You start choosing you. And when you do, the avoidant must either rise to meet your standards or naturally fall out of your life. Either outcome brings peace, because your power comes from knowing the truth. No one can leave you unless you keep the door open. You decide who remains in your world, not through force, but through the quiet strength of self-respect. In the end, remember that avoidants don't hold the power. You do, because the strength of any connection begins with the standards you set and the access you allow. When you stop chasing, stop compensating, and stop surrendering your worth, you shift the entire dynamic, inviting only those who are capable of meeting you with presence, effort, and respect. Thank you for listening, for showing up for your own growth, and for choosing to value yourself in every relationship you step into.